This is a live in-person meeting open to the public in accordance with the Sunshine Act. By participating in this meeting, you are consenting to the recording and retention of future proceedings. Hearing, would you please call the roll?
Janelle Ressler. Here. Barry Bredman. Here. Stephen Yerger.
Here.
Nick Love.
Here. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and remember to sign.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, there is no public comment tonight, so we will start with our presentation from Dr. Berryman and Mr. Powell.
Okay, thank you. For those of you who do not know Mr. Powell, he teaches at the high school, physics primarily, can dabble in some math from time to time, but primarily the physics world. First of all, thank you, because the board had approved for Brett and I to attend the SAS conference that PDE puts on every year up in Hershey. A ton of information that we were able to learn that will help us as we guide the science department over the next few years. So the presentation tonight, we really focused and narrowed it in on the new science standards, which are, for shortening, are always just called STEELs. So science, technology, engineering, environmental literacy, and sustainability. And so then what we did is with the implementation or the adoption of the new policy or standards, what we did then is go through and look at, so how do we have to plan for the new standards? How are we going to prepare for them with our staff? And then how are we going to implement them? So that's kind of how the presentation is broken down a little bit. If you have questions as we go through, just ask as we go. You don't have to hold them till the end.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So during the planning phase, one of the biggest things starting in 23-24 is Ms. Glass, who's the middle school assistant principal, took a team of teachers, and I believe Dr. Mitchell went as well, to the IU, and they really took some time as a unit to delve into what are the new standards and how are they so much different, because they are extremely different than what we currently have. And so with these new standards, what do we need to do to rewrite our curriculum? So then after investigating what the new standards are, what that looks like in grades 3 to 5, 6 to 8, and then at the high school level. So then from there, you guys know that we're working on our proficiency scales. So taking those standards and then writing them into our proficiency scales, which is our curriculum. So where do all of those standards fit in each of those grade bands? What resources do we need to be able to implement the curriculum and support the teachers in their lesson planning and getting it in front of the students? Then what we had to do also is look at some scheduling. So right now, I believe I've mentioned this in previous meetings, working with Mr. Moran on the elementary schedule. So where are we fitting in science? How many minutes a day are our students getting science? Currently, and this will come up again a little later, currently the PSA for science had been in 4th grade. This year it's getting moved to 5th grade. With that, when it was in 4th grade, they would do two trimesters of science, 1 trimester of social studies. Well, now the test is getting moved to 5th grade. So you can't have 1 semester or trimester of science in 5th grade and 2 of social studies when that's the tested year. So really just kind of taking a look at the scheduling of when we're teaching science and how much science our kids are getting. And for tonight, our focus really is 3 through 9, so to speak. But there are K-2 standards that we will also be going through next year, working with the K-2 group. And then also our chem and physics teachers will also be implementing some standards. But the focus for tonight is going to be really that 3 to 9 time. And then you'll see on there too the scheduling of Mr. Powell. So Dr. Mitchell had come to me last year when I was the high school principal and said, is there any way for you to get creative with Mr. Powell's schedule so that he can really help delve into these standards, what it looks like in the classroom, start looking at these resources, helping our teachers write those proficiency skills. So we worked some magic and got three periods a day that Brett can really, he comes down, he works with the teachers at ACES. He goes to all the department meetings for science at NAMS, in service days. So coming up, I think a lot of you know the high school technically is off now the 17th, but they're working the 20th. Mr. Powell has volunteered his time on the 17th. He's going to come in the part of the day. He's going to work with the elementary team on their proficiency skills, looking into those resources and start that lesson planning. And then the other part of the day, he's going to be with the NAM science teachers doing the same thing. So very, very thankful that he agreed to do that. You'll also see I have up there practices, core ideas, and cross-cutting. That is really, so our standards actually come from Next Generation Standards, which Pennsylvania never adopted. They came up with their own and called them SEALs. So this is just their 3 bands that they look at when we're putting in the standards. So then going through the conference, one of the things that they really talked to us about is science now is kind of being taught in 3 buckets, if you will. So gathering data, making sense of the data, and then developing and refining your explanations. And so it's investigative practices, sense-making practices, and then critiquing those practices. Because you come up with new methods or more research, and so then you have to go back and constantly revisit science practices. So if you click on that one more time, Carrie, so when you're implementing this and teaching in the classroom, if you're doing the investigating practices, you're really like asking those questions. And it's a very narrow question, but then kids, as they start to answer that, broaden their knowledge of that topic. And I'll just give you an example. And Brett's got one for you too. When we went to this conference, one of the things that they had us do, it was probably like 8 to 10 tables of probably 10 to 12 people each table, give or take. They said, individually, I want you to define what gravity is, like as independently. So like we're all like writing what we think our definition is of gravity. Then they said, as a table, I want you to come up with a consensus as to what gravity is. Thankfully, Brett was at our table because he had a much better understanding with some of the other science people. But then then we had to draw it. So you had probably 10 tables, 8 to 10 tables. Every single table had a different depiction or drawing of what gravity is, and a different explanation of what gravity is. And so it's really a way of getting kids to talk about gravity and what do you know and what do you have to research and what kind of answers and what kind of questions are you coming up with. So that's just kind of like an overview of kind of how you start that investigating. So then you have kids start investigating how they're going to figure out what gravity is. And then if there's mathematics involved, which there is, because there's a very cumbersome formula to figure out gravity that somebody actually used as their depiction of the model. They just threw up the formula. So that's where you're investigating. And then your sense making. So going to your models, like as you're trying to make sense of all that, if you're developing a model to try to represent the content or the topic that you're talking about, analyzing any data that you have gathered, that you have read about, that you've researched, you pull in all the different data points and try to make sense of that. And then come up with an explanation of what that data means. So like that's the sense making part of it. And then you get into the critiquing practices. So really engaging in that argument, when constructive arguments, when you're gathering all that evidence. Well, what does it mean? How am I interpreting it? How am I evaluating it? Where did I gather this source from in my research? And then really just how you're going to communicate that information out. So whether it's in a presentation or, you know, again, explaining your model or doing, they showed a lot where kids will do like almost the storyboards or design models, like 3D models, and then explain their representation of whatever phenom they're talking about or learning about. I think Mr. Powell.
Yep. So we did borrow some graphics from different conferences that we were at. This was one of those. So it kind of goes through, just shows what traditional science practices look like, and then what the aim is, which is the new STEELS practices, what that should actually look like. So you'll see a lot less of rote memorization of facts and terminology, more of that, you know, as needed. So learning in context, that would be the goal. And then the second point there would be learning of ideas disconnected from phenomena. We don't like that. We want the phenomena to actually be the context for the learning. So that last part then, again, less of teachers providing information to the whole class, like a lectures type situation or just reading. Not that those things would go away, but then more of students doing the actual science. You want to learn science by doing science. So that was, I guess, the big takeaway from that. So this was a really powerful example, I thought, from one of the presentations I was in. And this is made up words, so this doesn't mean anything. But it looks a lot like something that you could see in a science textbook. It's just that these are made up words. And then they asked us, well, read this paragraph. Can you answer those 4 questions? And you can. So that first question says, what is traxylene, which is a made-up thing? Well, the second sentence up there says traxylene is a new form of zeanter. So a student, ostensibly with the old, you know, traditional way of doing science, could just write down, well, traxylene is a new form of zeanter. And they could do that. They could answer all 4 of those questions and really not know science. But they would get an A, and that would be that. And the teacher might even look at that and say, well, that student knows all about the methylation of traxylene. So we want to move away from that. So I just thought that was a really powerful example. So this was another powerful visual of what the old model of instruction looks like and what we would like to move to. So a lot of lecture, a lot of notes, with labs sprinkled in, and then some application at the end is what science looks like. Even at the university level, that's what science typically looks like now. But the new model of instruction that STEELS really is pushing for is start with a phenomenon, so some interesting thing, some attention-grabbing phenomenon that is related to that content. And then the students are going to spend a lot of time investigating that. So that could be through lab type situations, and of course that's going to be guided by the teacher, but it's not just lecture. So then at the end, the goal would be the student, after learning all that information through investigating, would be able to apply it to a new phenomenon. So that would be the goal there. Go ahead. So then what does this look like at each grade level? So 3 to 5, that grade band, they've been working on updating their proficiency scales, which is definitely time consuming because they are new standards. Hard to talk about the schedule changes a little bit. One resource that is a really good resource you'll see on the right there would be OpenSciEd. That came up a lot while we were at this conference. It is free, and it just has a lot of materials, lesson plans. It's a really good resource that students could benefit from, I think, and teachers wouldn't have to just take all of it. They could pull, you know, what they want that would work for the students. But that's just one potential option. Yeah, go ahead.
So if you do go on to OpenSciEd, you can go on there and you can see where it's still in development, and they may have a unit on the water cycle, and so it will share with them like how to construct that lab, how to introduce that lab, some things like that. Please be aware though, if you go on there, there is a section where it says their curriculum. That's not what we're using. We're writing our curriculum with the proficiency scales. It's only a resource for some of the lesson planning, some of the labs, what kind of materials they might need. There's actually a teacher handbook in there that helps teachers go through as they're looking at the different phenoms and some things that they can do. So I just wanted to caution you when you go on there. It does say curriculum, but we are not using their curriculum. The teachers are writing their curriculum through that process.
And then I guess probably the most important resource would be time. These things do take time. It is not only a new way of really thinking about science, it's new standards as well. So just preparing all of that certainly won't be an overnight process. This will look like a slow migration towards better science instruction over time. So what comes next would be the common assessments, which I think has been talked about here before too. And then the PSSA is, as you mentioned, for 5th grade, and that assesses science 3 through 5. But 6 through 8, very similar. So proficiency scales being updated. I've been working with them on some unit planning, and that has involved looking at some resources as well. So one of those resources I screen grabbed an example of there on the right. They're called gizmos. That's something that they're going to have next year. And they're mostly simulations, but they also have some manipulatives with them, so certain worksheets and things, or interactive questioning that can be go along with that. But it's really good because something like that can't be done in the classroom. You can't put somebody on top of the earth and throw a baseball around the earth. But you can simulate that in a computer simulation. So it works really well for students to see things that either we don't have money for because we can't buy something crazy expensive to do in the classroom, or something that literally just can't be done in the classroom. So that's another great resource. And then of course the assessments and the PSSA is in 8th grade for that grade band. So then grades 9 through 12, the focus really at first, I suppose, will be in grade 9, because that's where the biology keystone is. So proficiency scales being updated there, common assessments as well. But again, I just think the important part is that this progress will take some time. I do really feel for biology because they have to take the regular PSSA this year, or the regular keystone, I should say, which is on the current standards, and then these new standards, they'll be assessed immediately next year. So they get no trial run, unfortunately. So.
And I, fortunately, somehow I was able to get time with the PDE science curriculum guy. I just happened to be in the same area and got some one-on-one with him for about a half hour, 45 minutes at the conference. And I did ask if there was any way, 2 things. So this year's grade 5 and grade 8 PSSA is a pilot. So while we'll get participation, it's just a baseline of scores for the state to see where we are with the new exam. As Brett was saying, biology does not get that same consideration. So when the students take the exam next spring in biology, it counts. It's not a pilot. And so I did ask if there was any inclination from PDE, are they going to ask the federal government for a waiver for the keystone? As of right now, they didn't think that was going to happen, but that it wasn't out of the realm of possibility. So to Mr. Powell's point, biology can't switch their curriculum yet. It's going to be a summertime flip. Now they're working on it. Don't get me wrong. They're writing the proficiency scales. They're in a lot of these resources looking at it already. But it's a quick flip. And also to say, so let's say somebody took the keystone this spring and they're not proficient. And so they take keystone biology the beginning half of next year. It will still be on, it'll be the old test still. So our teachers are our teachers at the high school will be living in 2 different worlds next year when it comes to the biology.
So they will make time, that's like stuff if they fail it, and then have to take the new test.
Right, that is, yes,
the following
yeah,
year.
good point.
So,
Yeah.
but still, the fact that our teachers have to be, that's, be polished up.
Burton. Yeah. Which they do a really nice job, so I'm not concerned with that. It's just they are going to be managing two different curriculums for sure. And so implementation, some of this we talked about throughout this presentation. So those three practices that we talked about, investigating, defense making, and the critiquing, that is a shift from the traditional teaching practices like reading about sciences versus doing science. So that's part of the implementation. We're really just trying to work with the staff right now as one unit at a time because as Brett said, every single unit has to be redone to align all the standards. So, you know, when you have that big goal and you just kind of like parcel it down, okay, here's what I can do step 1, here's step 2. So that's really what we're working with them on, just to make sure we're supporting them and they're not getting